The hushed discussions began the very day Clay Callahan ventured into the dense forest and failed to return. June, cradling their infant son, who was merely 6 months old at the time, and swaddled in a delicate blanket that once belonged to Clay's mother, stood on the threshold of the modest rented room. Her gaze was fixed upon the distant tree line, a vigil she had maintained for an entire week. The towering pines loomed, dark and utterly still. Clay had explained his intention to inspect his trap lines, assuring her of his return before evening. He had then bestowed a kiss upon the baby's forehead, brushed his rough fingers against June's cheek, and departed with his rifle and pack. Search parties had scoured the wilderness for 2 weeks, yielding no trace, not a body, no indication of a struggle, nothing to illuminate the mystery of his vanishing. Some speculated he had absconded, while others murmured about encounters with bears or perilous falls into ravines. June found herself adrift, uncertain of what truth to embrace. Her sole certainty was Clay's absence and her solitary existence with a child. That was 3 years prior. Now, in the burgeoning spring of 1847, June sat upon the precipice of her utterly valueless inheritance, her son, Samuel, a comforting weight upon her hip. Her eyes were drawn to the meandering creek, the very watercourse that rendered the land Clay had bequeathed her almost entirely unusable. The parcel, scarcely an acre in size, formed a crude rectangle bisected by the stream. This division created 2 sliver-like strips so narrow that even constructing a simple chicken coop would feel constricting. The banks were so close that Samuel could easily toss a stone across. Clay had secured this property in a card game a mere 6 months before his disappearance. He had returned home brimming with excitement, speaking of it as their crucial stake, their harbinger of future prosperity. June had visited the land the following day, and her heart had plummeted. The creek rendered it unsuitable for cultivation, for construction, for any practical purpose. Yet, as she observed it now, June perceived something novel. Wisps of vapor ascended from the water's surface into the crisp morning air. She had followed the creek upstream and discovered its origin, a natural spring, bubbling forth from the earth, its water as clear and as pleasantly warm as water left to sit for an hour. Even in April, with the grass still bearing the kiss of frost at dawn, the creek flowed with a gentle warmth. She recalled reading about geysers in the Western Territories, locales where subterranean heat warmed the water. While this was not intensely hot, it was certainly invitingly tepid. "Mama," Samuel piped up, pointing towards a trout holding its position steadfastly against the current, its speckled flank visible through the transparent water. "I see him, my darling," June replied. She gently set him down and crouched at the water's edge, immersing her fingers. A pleasant warmth spread up her arm. For the preceding 8 months, she had been subsisting in a makeshift shelter adjacent to the Hoffman's barn, her rent paid through diligent laundry service and mending their garments. Mrs. Hoffman possessed a kind disposition, but her eldest daughter had begun making pointed remarks about women unable to retain their husbands loud enough for June to overhear. June straightened and surveyed the property once more. Both sides of the stream, the creek itself, the seemingly insurmountable middle ground. She realized she had been viewing the challenge from the wrong perspective. The creek was not an impediment, it was the very foundation. Mr. Thornton, the banker, possessed an affectation for thin spectacles and an even thinner capacity for patience. "Mrs. Callahan, I cannot in good conscience—" "The land serves as collateral," June interjected, her voice steady. She had donned her sole respectable dress, a garment so extensively mended that its original fabric was barely discernible beneath the myriad patches. "And I have already secured arrangements with the Lewiswises and the Kowalskis for laundry and preserving services throughout the winter. I am capable of meeting the payment obligations." The image of a lone woman constructing a dwelling over a creek was clearly a point of contention. "Yes, sir," June affirmed. "I've also spoken with Olaf Hansen regarding the timber. He has agreed to provide it at a fair price." She had meticulously rehearsed this discourse numerous times, anticipating every potential objection. Mr. Thornton removed his spectacles and massaged the bridge of his nose. Through the window, the bustling thoroughfare of Red Creek Crossing hummed with its customary activity. The general store, the blacksmith's forge, the church with its gleaming white steeple. June had resided in this very settlement her entire life. Her birth had taken place in a cabin 2 miles south, a structure consumed by fire when she was 12 years old. She had weathered that ordeal. She was confident she could surmount this one. $70, Mr. Thornton stated finally, payable over a period of 3 years. However, Mrs. Callahan, should you default, I will not hesitate. June affixed her signature to the documents, her hands remarkably steady. Samuel waited outside in the care of old Mrs. Chen, the proprietor of the boarding house, who had graciously agreed to supervise him for the afternoon. As June emerged into the bright spring sunshine, the meager sum clutched in her pocket, her heart pounded against her ribs with a fierce intensity, as if yearning for liberation. $70. She had never before held such a significant amount of currency. It felt simultaneously like a weight and a whisper of potential. The town's whispers commenced even before she had procured the first plank of lumber. Olaf Hansen, who operated the sawmill situated to the north of the settlement, was a man of imposing stature, his hands resembling hefty slabs of beef, yet he possessed a surprising tenderness when discussing timber. June unfurled her sketches upon his workbench, rough drafts conceived by candlelight after Samuel had drifted off to sleep. "You intend to construct a dwelling, spanning the water?" Olaf inquired, his tone more declarative than questioning. "The creek's narrowest point is only 12 feet across. I plan to anchor foundation posts on both banks, sunk deep into the clay and stone, with joists extending perpendicular to the current." June gestured towards her designs. "The primary structure will bridge the creek, with the floor elevated 2 feet above the anticipated high water mark." Olaf examined the sketches with deliberation. "You have accounted for potential flooding. I have observed this creek for months. It swells during the spring melt, but never exceeds 8 inches. The thermal spring maintains a consistent flow, precluding ice dams." "Cedar for the posts," Olaf offered. "It resists decay. Pine for the framing. It is more economical, and you will need every available penny. Oak for the floor joists, particularly where they span the water." Together, they compiled a comprehensive lumber list: 2x6 joists, 1x8 floorboards, and 2x4 studs for the wall framing. June counted out $43, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Nails, tar paper, stone for the foundation. The expenses continued to accumulate, much like rising floodwaters. "My son, Jochab, can assist you with excavating the foundation holes," Olaf offered. "He is 16 and quite strong. 3 days of work." "I can compensate him with—" "No," Olaf interrupted. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill. I lost my wife 5 years ago. I understand the challenges." He paused, his gaze distant. "People will undoubtedly voice their opinions, Mrs. Callahan. Disregard them." June nodded, her voice thick with emotion. Jacob Hansen arrived the following morning, armed with a post-hole digger and an air of disinterest that clearly indicated his preference for being elsewhere. He was a lanky youth, all awkward angles of elbows and knees, yet he worked diligently and without complaint. June meticulously marked the locations for the foundation posts, 4 on each bank, strategically positioned back from the immediate edge where the soil offered greatest stability. Samuel played nearby, fashioning rudimentary cannons from creek stones. June kept a watchful eye on him while assisting Jacob, maintaining tension on the measuring line and verifying the excavation depths. They needed to reach a depth of 4 feet to encounter the underlying clay layer. "Why did your husband depart?" Jacob inquired on the second day. His voice strained with exertion as he levered out a substantial rock. June's grip tightened on the line. "I do not know that he departed. It is possible he is deceased. People say many things." June's response was sharper than she had intended. "Most of it is not their concern." Jacob's cheeks flushed, and he resumed his digging. By the third day, all 8 holes were excavated. June arranged for Olaf's freight wagon to deliver the cedar posts, each measuring 12 feet in length and as substantial in girth as Samuel's entire body. It required the combined efforts of June, Jacob, and 2 men from the general store to maneuver the initial post into its designated position. They carefully set it within the hole, filled the base with gravel for optimal drainage, and then compacted clay and stones around it, tamping everything down with resolute force until the post stood firm and perfectly plumb. June's shoulders ached profoundly from exertion. Her hands, raw and blistered, bled and blistered anew. Yet by the week's end, all 8 posts stood like ancient sentinels, 4 on either side of the creek. "What is the next step?" Jacob inquired, his earlier reluctance having visibly diminished as he became invested in the project. "The floor joists," June replied. "Then we shall see if my seemingly outlandish idea proves viable." The installation of the floor joists represented the critical juncture. These were robust oak beams, 8 inches wide and 2 inches thick, destined to span the creek from bank to bank. June was tasked with bolting them securely to the cedar posts, thereby creating a foundational framework capable of supporting the entire structure of the cabin. She borrowed a ladder from the church and worked diligently during the evenings, as long as the daylight permitted, with Samuel seated nearby on a blanket. The rhythmic sound of her hammer echoed across the nascent settlement. Spectators began to gather, some offering assistance, though most merely observed with curiosity. "It is going to plunge directly into the water," remarked Tom Brenner, the proprietor of the livery stable. "The entire structure will succumb to rot within a year," added his brother. June, undeterred, continued her hammering, having meticulously wrapped the ends of the joists in tar-soaked cloth to ward off moisture. She obsessively checked her level, ensuring each beam rested perfectly horizontal, a meticulous technique imparted by Clay, who had once been a carpenter before the allure of trapping promised riches. Clay, who had departed, leaving her with nothing but this challenging land and a hungry child. She firmly suppressed the sentiment and drove another nail home. The process of installing the joists consumed 2 weeks. Every evening, after completing her laundry duties, June ascended the borrowed ladder and toiled until her vision blurred. A perpetual ache settled in her shoulders. Her hands, blistered and bleeding, developed calluses so thick that they could handle rough lumber without protection. The most arduous undertaking was the construction of the chimney. June had never before laid stone. She dedicated a week to collecting river rocks, meticulously sorting them by size and shape, learning how to fit them together like intricate puzzle pieces. She prepared mortar from sand, lime, and water, learning through a process of trial and error the precise proportion of water required and the optimal setting time. If the mixture was too wet, it would not hold. If too dry, it crumbled. The chimney rose gradually, a painstaking endeavor. She erected a temporary scaffold from scrap lumber and painstakingly placed each stone one by one. Her back protested ceaselessly. She dropped a stone on her foot, rendering her unable to walk properly for 3 days. Yet she persisted, hobbling around the site, refusing to yield. The chimney continued to ascend. When it finally surpassed the roofline, June stepped back, experiencing a sensation akin to pride. It was not aesthetically perfect. Some stones protruded unevenly, and the mortar lines were not flawlessly straight, but it was robust. It would serve its purpose. The roof was completed in July. Oak planks, layered with tar paper and topped with wooden shingles, formed its covering. She had painstakingly split the shingles herself from cedar logs. The shingles displayed an unevenness, some thick, some thin, but they would effectively repel the rain. She overlapped them with meticulous care, working from the bottom upwards, nailing each one securely in place. It was demanding labor under the oppressive summer sun, which beat down on her back as she navigated the roof frame, a hammer in one hand and nails held between her teeth. She had to exercise extreme caution. A single misstep could send her tumbling through the gaps. However, the framing she had constructed was sound and sturdy, capable of bearing her weight. Samuel occasionally lent a hand, passing her nails one at a time, his small face etched with earnest concentration. He was now 4 years old, tall for his age, with Clay's dark hair and June's observant gray eyes. "Where is Papa?" he inquired one evening as they ate beans and cornbread by the firelight. June had anticipated this question for months. "I do not know, my darling. Is he deceased? I do not know." "Then he might return." June gazed at her son, at his hopeful expression, and her heart fractured anew for perhaps the 1,000th time. "He might, but we cannot wait for that. We must build our own future." Samuel nodded as if he comprehended, but June knew he did not. How could he? She herself barely grasped it. By August, the cabin possessed walls, a roof, a floor, and a chimney. Yet it remained incomplete. June constructed a low stone wall around the interior access point to the creek, carefully mortaring river rocks into a neat circle 2 feet in height. She installed a simple wooden bucket attached to a rope for drawing water. She meticulously chinked the gaps between the wallboards with moss and clay, effectively sealing out drafts. She built a modest porch on the eastern side, a mere 3 feet deep, where she could sit on warm summer evenings and watch the sun dip below the horizon behind the pines. Inside, she ingeniously divided the single room with a curtain fashioned from sewn-together flour sacks. One section housed her and Samuel's bed, a frame she had constructed from leftover lumber, topped with a mattress filled with prairie grass and scraps of wool. The other side contained a table, 2 chairs acquired through laundry exchanges, shelves for provisions, and the hearth. In the very center, the creek gently burbled through its stone-lined channel, perpetually warm, readily accessible, vibrantly alive. She could perch on its edge and dip her hand into the water at any moment. She could catch fish for their supper. She could wash herself without the arduous task of hauling buckets or heating water on the stove. The cabin measured 16 feet by 20 feet, modest, yet undeniably hers. She had expended 68 of her 70 borrowed dollars. The remaining $2 were allocated towards her inaugural payment to Mr. Thornton. They took up residence on the 1st of September, June carrying Samuel across the threshold. He giggled and darted towards the creek access, peering down into the flowing water. "We live on a bridge, Mama." "We live over a blessing," June corrected gently. She had come to regard the warm creek in precisely that light. A blessing, ingeniously concealed within the heart of an insurmountable predicament. The ensuing autumn vindicated her perspective. While other households diligently hauled water from the town well or collected rainwater in barrels, June simply lowered her bucket through her own floor. The water remained unfrozen. She could wash clothing in tepid water without prior heating, a distinct luxury that conserved both firewood and precious time. She discovered the distinct advantage of catching fish through the removable floor section. Brown and brook trout, drawn to the gentle warmth of the water as the weather turned colder, became a readily available food source. She would lower a baited line in the evening and retrieve breakfast the following morning. Fresh fish, at least twice weekly, often more. She maintained the coolness of her milk and butter by suspending them in a basket just above the waterline, where the air remained consistently cool without succumbing to freezing temperatures. Her eggs, consequently, lasted for weeks. In an era where food preservation was the critical determinant between survival and starvation, June's Creek provided her with advantages unavailable to other women. The town's collective opinion underwent a gradual transformation. Some individuals continued to whisper about Clay's disappearance, about June's audacious undertaking, about a woman dwelling alone without male protection. However, others began to observe that she and Samuel appeared robust and healthy, that her laundry was consistently pristine and bright, washed in warm water rather than hauled frigidly from the well. They recognized that she had conjured something from virtually nothing, transforming barren land into a distinct asset. Mrs. Chen from the boarding house paid a visit, bringing a gift of preserved peaches. "You have done well," was all she offered, her words accompanied by a benevolent smile. Coming from Mrs. Chen, a woman who seldom dispensed compliments, this was a significant endorsement. Even the Brenner brothers, who had vociferously predicted her failure from the outset, ceased their critical pronouncements. Tom Brenner, one day in town, tipped his hat to her, a grudging admission that she had demonstrably proven him incorrect. The formidable storm arrived in late November. Its approach was palpable. The sky adopted a peculiar hue of yellow-gray, and the wind shifted to the northwest, carrying the faint scent of distant snow. Old Mr. Brenner, who had weathered 40 winters in Red Creek Crossing, declared it would be a severe tempest. His prediction proved remarkably accurate. It commenced on a Tuesday evening, initially as light snowfall that rapidly intensified, driven by a wind that howled with a life of its own. By midnight, June could no longer discern the tree line through the blinding whiteout. Snow accumulated against the cabin's northern wall, and the wind assailed the shingles with relentless fury. The temperature plummeted precipitously. Inside, June diligently fed the fire and checked the damper for the 100th time. Samuel slept fitfully, his slumber disrupted by the most violent gusts. The cabin groaned and creaked under the assault. June remained awake, her ears attuned to every sound, gripped by a paralyzing fear that the wind would rip away the roof or the immense weight of the snow would cause the walls to collapse. Yet the walls held firm. The roof remained intact. The chimney drew effectively, directing the smoke upwards and outwards, preventing it from infiltrating the living space. By the second day, the snow had accumulated to a depth of 3 feet and continued to fall relentlessly. June could only open the door a mere crack. She carefully rationed the firewood she had meticulously stacked inside, feeding the fire with deliberate precision. Through the floorboards, she could discern the persistent murmur of the creek, still flowing, still warm, still vibrantly alive. That day, she managed to catch 2 fish. Provisions in Red Creek Crossing were dwindling rapidly. She had learned from Mrs. Chen the day before the storm that the general store was reduced to stocking only flour and dried beans. However, June and Samuel were fortunate enough to enjoy fresh trout, fried in the last of her bacon fat. The warmth emanating from the creek maintained the cabin at a temperature far more comfortable than anticipated. Even when the fire diminished to embers during the night, the interior temperature never dropped below freezing. The gentle warmth rising from the water trapped beneath the floorboards created a pocket of habitable air. On the 3rd day, Samuel developed a cough. June's heart constricted with a primal fear, the same dread that haunted every frontier mother. Winter sickness often claimed the lives of children. In a conventional cabin, where ice often formed on the interior walls and water buckets froze solid, a sick child represented a dire situation. But June possessed the advantage of warm water. She bathed Samuel with damp cloths gently heated by the creek. She compelled him to drink cup after cup of warm water infused with honey. She maintained a warm and dry environment within the cabin, monitoring the fire constantly and adjusting the damper to prevent excessive smokiness. The cough subsided on the 4th day. Samuel's fever never escalated to a perilous level. On the 5th day, the storm finally abated. The wind ceased its fury and the snow stopped falling. June managed to force the door open and clear a path to the porch. The world was transformed. A breathtaking tableau of white, silent, beautiful, and undeniably perilous. Red Creek Crossing resembled a spectral town. Smoke curled from chimneys, yet scarcely anyone ventured outdoors. The cold was merciless, possessing the power to freeze exposed skin within minutes. However, June's Creek continued to flow with its comforting warmth. Steam rose from it in voluminous clouds, now visible since she had cleared the snow from the cabin's immediate vicinity. She witnessed the miracle of it firsthand. A ribbon of heat cutting through the frozen landscape. The town slowly resumed its normal rhythm. When activity eventually returned, the inhabitants spoke of the storm for weeks. The Kowalskis had lost half their chickens to the extreme cold. The Lewises' well had frozen solid and would remain inaccessible for another week. The boarding house had exhausted its firewood supply by the 4th day, resorting to burning furniture, 2 chairs, and a portion of a table to maintain their stove. 3 families found themselves so profoundly snowbound that they were compelled to excavate tunnels to reach their outbuildings. Mrs. Hoffman's sister, residing 2 miles to the east, had narrowly escaped peril when an ice blockage in her cabin's chimney led to the dwelling filling with smoke. She was forced to shatter a window for fresh air, admitting the biting cold, but ultimately preserving her life. They recounted that June Callahan had weathered the ordeal better than anyone. Her peculiar cabin, with a stream flowing directly through it, had proven its worth. Martin Cole visited to assess the structure. He circled it deliberately, scrutinizing the foundation posts, testing the floor joists, and searching for any fissures in the masonry. He declared with evident admiration not a single imperfection in the mortar. Furthermore, he noted the roof's complete integrity. Shaking his head, he commended Mrs. Callahan, stating she had constructed it expertly, even surpassing expectations. He admitted to having witnessed cabins built by seasoned men with 2 decades of experience that had fared far worse during the storm. Word of her resilience spread. Jakob Hansen brought his father to witness the marvel. Olaf, moving with deliberate care, examined the floor joists, the chimney, and the stone-lined channel for the creek. He tested the floorboards spanning the water, searching for any signs of decay or weakness. His inspection extended to the walls, the roof's framing, and the meticulous way she had sealed the gaps. He concluded with praise for her commendable craftsmanship, predicting the cabin's longevity of 50 years with proper upkeep. A sense of relief washed over June, dissipating the gnawing apprehension that had plagued her since the initial murmurs of doubt and the pronouncements of her perceived folly. The winter intensified. December delivered significant snowfall, though not on the scale of the earlier tempest. January saw the town's water source freeze solid on 2 separate occasions, each requiring considerable effort with picks and hot water to re-establish access. February proved exceptionally harsh and protracted, with temperatures so extreme that metal became painfully hot to the touch and winds that pierced wool as if it were mere cotton. Yet June and Samuel remained safe and sound within their cabin, warmed by the flowing creek. Their sustenance consisted of fish, cured venison, and cornmeal porridge. They bathed in warm water drawn directly from the creek beneath their floor, maintaining their health and comfort. Samuel grew noticeably taller, diligently learned his letters by the flickering firelight, and found amusement in the wooden toys June fashioned from discarded lumber. June met her second installment payment to Mr. Thornton punctually, embarking on the journey to town on a day when the cold was merely sharp rather than unforgiving. He appeared taken aback by her presence, surprised by her survival, and astonished by her ability to produce the funds. "I understand your dwelling performed admirably during the recent storm," he remarked stiffly. "It did," she replied. "Perhaps my initial judgment of you was mistaken, Mrs. Callahan." This was the closest to an apology she was likely to receive from him, and she accepted it with quiet dignity. On certain evenings, after Samuel had drifted off to sleep, June would sit by the creek's edge and allow herself to recall Clay. She remembered his nervous yet proud smile on their wedding day, the profound emotion in his eyes as he held Samuel for the first time, whispering fervent promises for the future they envisioned. She also recalled his parting kiss that final morning, his lips warm, his mind already focused on the trapline. Whether he was alive or deceased remained an unknown. She couldn't ascertain if he had intentionally abandoned them, become lost, or met with a tragic accident. The uncertainty might persist indefinitely. However, one truth resonated with her. She had transformed the formidable land he had bequeathed her into a true home. She had erected a structure of such resilience that it had withstood the tempest. She had ensured their son's safety, sustenance, and warmth throughout a winter that had decimated livestock and fractured families. On nights when sorrow weighed heavily upon her, when wakefulness offered no solace and she yearned for him, she would ground herself in this reality. While the fate of Clay Callahan remained a mystery, the outcome for June Callahan was clear. She had endured, she had built, she had persevered. Spring arrived early that year. By March, the snowmelt had commenced, causing the creek to swell with runoff. June meticulously inspected the floor joists, finding them robust and intact. Her tar-wrapped connections had served their purpose admirably, and the cedar posts stood firm. Samuel celebrated his 5th birthday in April. June, using her dwindling sugar supply, baked him a modest cake and invited Mrs. Chen and the Hansons to join the festivities. They gathered on the porch under the afternoon sun, observing the gentle steam rising from the creek. Jakob Hansen, now 17 and fully employed at his father's mill, presented Samuel with a handcrafted wooden horse. "You should be exceedingly proud," Mrs. Chen remarked. "You have constructed something that many believed impossible." June gazed at her cabin, at its sturdy walls, its perfectly aligned chimney, and its leak-free roof. She contemplated the warm water flowing beneath her home, the constant, invaluable blessing that had shielded both her and Samuel through the most challenging winter she had ever experienced. "I am," June affirmed, and indeed she was. The whispers had not entirely ceased, nor likely would they ever. Certain individuals would invariably remember Clay's disappearance, harbor lingering questions, and offer their uninvited judgments. But June had absorbed a crucial lesson. The opinions of others offered no warmth during the harsh winter, nor could they provide sustenance for her child, nor could they construct her a home. She had accomplished all of that herself, on a creek bed, in defiance of skepticism, through the depths of grief, with borrowed funds, blistered hands, and an unyielding spirit. She had taken the formidable expanse of land Clay had left her and transformed it into the most ingenious dwelling in Red Creek Crossing. She had built something robust enough to withstand the fiercest storms. In the evenings when sorrow felt overwhelming, she would remind herself of this. The fate of Clay Callahan might remain unknown, but the outcome for June Callahan was definitive. She had survived. She had built. She had endured. As summer approached, June began contemplating future enhancements, perhaps a modest addition for extra storage or a more suitable chicken coop. Her mind teemed with ideas, and her schedule allowed for their realization. She possessed a perpetually warm creek flowing through the heart of her challenging yet cherished home. Watching Samuel play by the water's edge, June recognized that this was sufficient. It was far more than sufficient. It was everything. The cabin perched above the creek, a tangible link between the past and the future. June had commenced with land deemed valueless and borrowed capital. She had fashioned a home for herself above the warming waters, and in doing so had meticulously crafted a life.